Should I start? Very good. Welcome everyone from all over the world. It is so wonderful to have everybody here. My name is Jamie Denbo. Welcome to the book club by the Israeli Institute for Hebrew Literature. It's a series of conversations with Israeli and Jewish authors. Thank you. Please feel free to continue popping into the chat to tell us where you're from. I'm coming to you live from Los Angeles, California, beautiful downtown. I'm currently in the Nister book store and library. It's a stunning location. I'll tell you a little bit more about later. The Israeli Institute for Hebrew Literature helps Israeli authors reach readers around the world. Our new International Hebrew Literature Fund supports foreign publishers in translating and publishing Hebrew books. Your support helps Israeli stories travel across borders and languages. And at the end of our conversation today, we are going to share a QR code with more information and donation options. Nister, okay, thank you for hosting us here at Hollander Books. This is a beautiful Jewish bookstore in downtown Los Angeles. It is a synagogue. It is a cultural center. It is a home for art, literature, music, a broad range of Jewish civilization. And I would very much like to introduce our guest authors today. It is an honor and a privilege. I'm a fan. I am a reader. Just so everyone's clear, I am not a professor of literature. I am not an author. Sometimes book conversations and conversations with authors can be incredibly, this is meant to feel like a book club. If you have not read the books, that is okay. Please stay on the Zoom. I guarantee you will want to read these books when we're done with this conversation because I'm coming at this as a fan. So with that caveat in mind, I'm a comedian, so I'm going to try my best to stay normal. Our first author is Tehila Hakimi. She is a distinctive voice in contemporary Hebrew literature. Her recent novel, Hunting in America, it was translated into several languages. It explores the intersections of work, of culture, contemporary life with the sharp, understated sensibility that has become her hallmark. And then we also have Joshua Cohen, one of the most celebrated voices in contemporary American fiction, whose novel, The Netanyahus, winner of the 2022 Pulitzer Prize for fiction, heard of it. It is brilliantly written. It intertwines humor and history and politics, questions of Jewish identity. It's with biting insight and intellectual daring. Cohen is also a widely acclaimed author of novels such as Book of Numbers and Wits, which established him as one of the most inventive and ambitious writers of his generation, which is our generation, and I'm honored to share it. Please welcome Joshua and Tehila. It is so nice to have you both here. You can unmute yourselves. And we will get into it. The first question I had originally had was, have you read each other's books? Kidding, because I know that you have. Joshua is actually quoted on the cover of Tehila's book, okay? Hunting in America. He wrote, just purely bangs. And if you have read the book, and if you haven't read the book, that is a fantastic double entendre. It's play on words because of the hunting. Well done, sir. I want to talk for a moment quickly first about where books begin, themes and creative inspiration, because both of these books, even though they are so distinctly different, I don't think it's a stretch to say that they are wildly different. If you were to describe the log line of both of these books, you would wonder what they have in common. And yet both of these books deal with the culture clash, I believe, between Americans and Israelis. How they explore that theme is incredibly different. So I'm going to start with Joshua. The Netanyahus would be classified, I assume, as historical fiction, taking real figures, supposing a story about them. Can you very quickly tell everyone what inspired the idea for the Netanyahus? Because it is an incredible story of creative inspiration.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, it's an honor to be here. I'm really glad to do this event and to be here with Tehila and to do something with this institute that that I have been around and known their work for a very long time. I think my own history with the institute goes back to when I was friendly isn't the word, because it was hard to be friends with a person that old and that cantankerous, but with the great departed Israeli novelist Yoram Kaniuk, who was constantly trying to get me to translate some of his books or some of his pages, loose pages that were just kind of accumulating in his apartment at the time on Bilu Street. And and uh, and anyway, that was my first kind of contact with the institute. What feels like many years ago, and it's nice to be doing an event with them now. Um, the source, I guess, comes from another cantankerous old man. I guess I have maybe an affinity for them on my way to becoming one of them myself. I'll probably, reach that level of ordinariness and stubbornness, if not of brilliance, at some point. But it comes from Harold Bloom, who was again was a friend, though it was difficult to be his friend sometimes. Who wanted help writing a memoir, and or said he did. I don't know if he really intended to get one done. He ended up finishing a memoir about his life in poetry, and never really did the memoir of his life, sort of where the bodies were buried type of memoir. But sitting with him in his house in New Haven, I think it was, he had TV on in the background. I think people of a certain generation who grew up with TV, that comes into a certain generation, they always keep it on in the background, but on mute. And Bibi Netanyahu comes up on CNN, and he's in the middle of talking about something else, and then he just kind of turns to me and he goes, "Oh, I met him." And I'm thinking, "Oh, well, when did you meet him? Did you?" Thinking maybe he met him in the '90s when Bibi was the UN, or or whatever. And he says, "No, I think he was like 10 years old. I met him. I met his father." And then he proceeded to kind of tell me a sketchy story, sketchy in many senses, sketchy. And then Jean Bloom came in the room, his wife, still with us, and says, "No, that's not how it went." And then they argued about it, and then I just decided I needed to make it up.
Oh, and that is the essence for those of you who have not read the Netanyahus. It is an expansion of that chapter, and you do it with surprising the precision with which you create this world and this encounter of young Benjamin Netanyahu at 10 years old and his family is it puts you as though it's very hard to read it and you forget that it's not an actual account. It's so, and it's just it's very real, and it's very evocative, it's very sensory, it's really something. So thank you for that. Tehila, same question. What inspired you to write Hunting in America? And the log line of Hunting in America, I would say it's an Israeli female protagonist who is in corporate America and takes up hunting as her almost hobby while she is navigating this very isolating assimilation experience. But can I ask what specifically inspired this story for you?
Mm-hmm. So first, I just want to say that I'm very honored to be here tonight with Josh and with you, with Joshua and with you, and also to thank the ITHL for having me. So the book, I think, started from an idea like of this woman who I already actually wrote like before in a previous book, but I felt like I was not finished with her. This person who was very much dedicated to her career, like maybe like myself in my early 30s or my mid 30s, just before I sold my soul and my bank account to literature for nothing, actually, not for much anyway. But and I was thinking about her and about myself, that my uh, like thinking about a relocation to the US as the holy grail of my career. Like it could be like the holy grail to get a job in the US. And I was thinking about this woman, and then when she went there, in my mind, I just saw her like holding a gun, holding a rifle. And with that image, I was thinking, okay, that's interesting because both cultures has this obsessive kind of thing with guns from different perspectives, but both culture has that. And also there's like a very, very obvious connections between the two countries around weapons. So I was very intrigued by this, and so this was how I went writing this book. But also it comes a bit from my experience as an engineer because I had a career in engineering and I worked a bit like in corporates, like American corporates, and also I was in the army, in the IDF, of course, and I had like training on weapons. So I used all that
I
for this
love
character.
I love that you filled in that it's that engineering because it is so ambiguous in the
Hmm.
book what her job and what the company really is, and I think that there's such a sense of ambiguity around corporate America,
Hmm.
that it's interesting to me also to hear an Israeli say that it would have been the holy grail to work in corporate America, which is not I don't for me it's not something I would have imagined. To me, I think of the Israeli tech sector as being so highly advanced, that I almost am interested in that it was. Do you think that that's because people also want to travel beyond the the borders of Israel? I know that Israel's very small.
Hmm.
Does America loom large as an adventure for a lot of Israelis in that kind of work?
I guess yes, but I guess also, like culturally wise, and you know, everyone here, I mean, Israelis in general, they look at America and they see it as something still as a place for opportunities, for big money, for it still stands like that kind of thing. Maybe it's a bit different now when Israel is more and more um, you know wrapped around itself, and maybe now it's a bit different.
Mm,
But when I wrote the book, it was like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. Um, these were the thoughts
yeah.
that I had about it. Yeah.
It's interesting because I also think about that answer in terms of the Netanyahus, which again, it's also the Netanyahus takes place in 1959. So, there's a perspective from the Israeli cultural perspective that is very different. It's very interesting. Um, okay, both of these books really address head on, in my opinion, the idea of discomfort. I would say reading, especially the Netanyahus in moments, there's, as the kids say, cringe. Woof. There's some awkward and just uncomfortable moments for those of you again who haven't read it. The Netanyahu's, Benjamin's a little boy, his family arrival, their arrival completely disrupts the assimilation experience of one American Jewish family in academia. And Joshua, you're basically dramatizing the way Israeli history repeatedly can intrude upon what some might call a very comfortable way of life in the diaspora. So, hunting in America, it's the Israeli character that I think remains uncomfortable. I don't feel that the Netanyahus are suffering the discomfort. Can each of you talk a little bit about how you chose to dramatize discomfort and why? And does that feel like a question that applies?
Should we have an uncomfortable silence while we decide
Yeah.
which one of us goes
Yep.
first?
Yep. Yep.
I
Yep.
think you're going to go first.
I
Yeah,
mean,
Josh.
I'm only comfortable when I'm uncomfortable. So I don't know discomfort. I don't know. I don't know what comfort would be. I would say that, you talk about the time period being different from, in my book, obviously 1959, 1960 being different from something set in the kind of international tech world, though, of the present or the very recent past. And the truth is that I think that that they're really good bookends, right?
Yeah.
Historical bookends, the period of at least that book of mine of Netanyahus and the period of hunting in America. And I say that because in the 1950s, you have the two you have first of all the establishment of the two major Jewish civilizations, right? You have this establishment of the state of Israel and what it means to be Israeli, and um, you have the crystallization of an Israeli identity that, for better or worse, erodes parochial differences or seeks to, through a number of mechanisms, right? The army probably being the most famous one, but a more fundamental one would be the Hebrew language itself, like creating an Israeli identity out of all of these streams. And in the United States in the 1950s, you see the beginning of what American Jews thought at the time was a full assimilation, right? Was essentially the triumphal America emerging triumphant from the Second World War, astounding gains in prosperity and in ecumenicism. You see a revision of a theological revision of Judaism in the 1950s to become one of a social justice movement that many American Jews latch onto as a way to ease their way toward an assimilated future. And that golden age, if you want to call it that, though of course anyone is free to look at these phenomenon and find negative valences to them, but this golden age seems to me something that by the time Tehila's book comes around is already over.
Yeah.
And we've entered now a period, I believe, of a kind of a global Jewish novel where, for better or worse, if someone coughs in Tel Aviv, someone gets sick or stabbed in New York. And that, I think, mixed with the idea of how small a market Hebrew is and the necessity of getting your literature translated into a language that isn't Hebrew, into a larger language, whether that's French or German or English, and the way in which American Jewish writers, despite our continued success here among a Jewish population that almost equals Israel's Jewish population, it's still become a more parochial and difficult environment to live in. And so I do think that we had a period of separateness. That period of separateness lasted from the founding of the State of Israel or the end of the Second World War to very recently. You see the roots of it in a lot of political movements before October 7th. But it seems to me that we're at the end of that period of difference, and the massive break in the Jewish community is going to result in one that is entirely alienated from Israel and its future, right? And so on one hand, you have global Jewry, and on the other hand, you have global anti-Zionism, or if you want to say it, global anti-Jewry, which after a generation or two will no longer be relevant. And so I look at, it's a long answer, but if you wanted to talk about something uncomfortable, I said let's be uncomfortable. But I think about the period that I was writing in the 50s, where so much was possible, where so many vistas seemed open. And then I read, and now I live today, and I read literature written about the present, like Hunting in America, and I realized how many options have been foreclosed. And this is only in the lifespan of my parents.
Well, thank you for that answer. It actually moves ahead to a question that I'm going to push up because I think it's relevant. You won and this also, Tehila, will get right to you as well, but you won the Pulitzer in 2022 for this book. Do you think that the reception, specifically and interpretation of the book, has changed since October 7th? Have you gotten different kinds of feedback?
Oh, I don't know that I would. I don't think it would have if I had written it today. I mean, first of all, I have to say it was very difficult to get it published when I did write it, and it was rejected by almost 24 publishers. I think it would be even harder for me to get it published today. As for prizes, prizes are always gambles. Who knows? But
Would you write it differently today, do you think? Would it be a different book?
I'd write it worse just because I'm older, and as you get older, you become a worse writer.
Tehila, your book was actually published in Israel in May 2023.
Mhm.
And in some ways, if what I'm following what Joshua is saying, it's actually more representative of a future that does look more similar to now post October 7th than it did before. But have you had or different feedback about your book post October 7th than perhaps before? I suppose it wasn't that long
Mhm.
as it was published, but what has that experience been for you as an author and with the material?
Yeah. Well, I think that like the book when it came out in Israel, just before, like in May, 5 months before, it got lots of attention and very nice reviews and readerships, and then when October 7 happened, and nobody was interested in books. It took a while for anyone um, to have that kind of attention, and for me, it was like, okay, this book is dead. Nobody gonna wanna read a book about guns. Uh, but then I think horribly, this book got um, um, like a layer of reality uh, around it. And then when you read it, it made sense. It maybe made more sense than before. Um, you know, and I must say, like, when I wrote it, uh, yeah, it was before October 7, but Israel is in war all the time. People in Sderot were bombed for 20 years. Like I was born when my father went to the Lebanon War, and my kids were born both during wars. So it's a constant kind of reality, horrible reality. We're now sitting here, and there is still a war going on in the north. Um, so, in a very horrible way, the reality pushed it more, even gave it another layer of importance, maybe even, or a different understanding.
Yeah.
I would also say that I think that this is a really notable phenomenon that I'm not like an academic literary critic, thank God, and but someone should be, and I do think that it's a fruitful um, avenue of research to look at these books that are published within a few years, sometimes even a few months before a major world-changing event, and you can see prophecy,
Yeah.
right? And of course, there is always that tendency of it's like the gematria fallacy. Like if you want to prove something, you can find a way to prove it, right? But there are all of these kind of strains of prophecy that come through literature uniquely, meaning that they don't come through, I find, in any other medium besides one of a person sitting quietly at the quiet center of their culture and channeling energies that only burst into the world later on. And that writers have rehearsals on the page for the traumas that their civilizations will then go to suffer. This is a phenomenon that is known. And I find that in your book, Taylor, like you feel that there are the seeds of these
Mhm.
things. And I think and to offer my answers to why, I think it has to do with writers being good writers, at least, being abnormally sensitive to and registering impressions earlier than than their loud arrivals on a very public scene.
Thank
Agree.
you.
And yeah, beautifully put and dead on. Let's talk about language. Tehila, you
Mhm.
create these very spare and unnerving worlds. You know, the coldness of the corporate office, the woods on a hunt. And when I found out that you were a poet, which I know is more commonly known in Israel, but this all made complete sense to me. Can you talk a little bit about how your experience as a poet influenced your work as a novelist?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, first I must say, because we're talking in English, and if, like most people here, will read the English translation, so I really want to say that the translator, Joanna Chen, did an amazing, amazing work, and we'll talk about it maybe later, but
Yeah.
she's also an essayist and a poet herself and a wonderful translator. So she really got the rhythm and the pace of the text. Um, I think in this book in specific, I used, I don't know, like my poetry writing experience, whatever, um, with emphasis on the short sentences, the music, the rhythm of the text, but and also I think um, allowing myself having her um, this nameless character, and like listening to her voice. It was I put a lot of effort in her voice, more than anything else, I think. Well, I did a research about the hunting, of course, because never went hunting. Uh, I thought I would, but I didn't. And but the voice in specific, it was crucial for me. The coldness, the barzel, I forgot the word in Hebrew, like the matechet, yes,
And the myth,
the still. If
steel.
if if I'm thinking about substance, it's not wood, it's
Iron.
not water, it's still. I wanted her to have this still kind of texture. Um, and yeah,
Yeah.
so I guess.
It worked. It worked. It was very, very effective. And, you know, so the question I would say to Joshua about the language, you know, you nail the world of American academia. Every single character feels so incredibly real in the ways they express themselves, either by speaking or through their letters. And I mean, I can only imagine that the translation process, speaking of the translations, must have been I can't imagine. Can you talk a little bit about what the translation process was for the Netanyahus? And to your point, this institute, translation, I it it's so important to get the specificity. So it's a labor intensive, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, my involvement with translation is usually just to buy people drinks. I mean, that's kind of what you can do. And then of course, if someone has a question, you can kind of, speak and kind of react to the question. Um, but no, I think that when you're talking to a translator, I mean, especially the Hebrew translator, Erez Volk translates it, and for him, it you have to find the opportunities. For example, there's a section in the book um, where a German Jew, Nolet, who's a professor of history, writes a letter of recommendation about Ben Zion Netanyahu,
Oh,
and
This
and
is
he
amazing.
presumably are writing that in this sort of very, very high 1950s literary Hebrew, right? So obviously, when that goes into Hebrew, there's a great chance to kind of play with the language of that wouldn't be apparent in English. So I think translators always look for those opportunities. I don't know, having translated a little bit myself, and I think there are translators in the audience here who have much more experience than I do doing this, but I'm translated a little bit myself. I think that the one of the biggest problems that I find is that when going between the languages is not just the size of one, versus the size of the other. I mean, English is just an enormous mongrel language that just soaks everything up. Um, but there's an intimacy of Hebrew that actually serves its compression, right? Where, pretty much everyone who speaks Hebrew is, like knows each other or can find each other. Like there's not that many degrees of separation between Hebrew speakers. The degrees of separation between English speakers culturally can be absolutely enormous.
Yes.
I mean, Israelis can think that there's large degrees of cultural separation between, Ashkenazim, Mizrahim, or whatever, but like it's nothing like a linguistic separation between me and a Indian speaker of English who learned British Indian English and has never lived in the United States. And I mean, it's a vast gulf. And so in cultural reference, in the centers of media transmission, in the body of illusions, I mean, it's an entirely different universe. And really, we can pretend it's the same language, but it doesn't operate according to the same codes. But with Hebrew, because there is there's a nation behind the language, right? There's an behind the language. Then there is an intimacy that can leverage its compression so that it's swift and direct in a way that English can very rarely achieve. English is much more, I think, indirect and wanderous, let's say, and wandering, and like my answer now. But one thing that I envy, and it's hard to say you can envy Hebrew because it's, I think, very hard to, as my wife would say, it's very hard where most of your audience is Jews. But there's an element, I think, of its intimacy, which is very difficult to transport into English.
I mean, to me, that's when people say, and unfortunately people do, can't AI just translate? I know.
Mm-hmm.
And to hear you speak in this way about obviously the vast idiosyncrasy, the differences between the languages, but also, we're talking, and this is to everyone here, to a poet and an author who have such a specific point of view and way with words. And you need a dialogue with a translator to get the essence of this book out. These are expressions of artistic point of view that I think AI, I hope, never catches up to. I mean, I don't see how it could, but I don't know. It's a fear. I know we're going to open it up to questions in a few moments, so please feel free to put your questions in the chat. But as long as we are talking about names, I know Tehila referred to the fact that our protagonist does not have a name, which is was such a strong choice. And I know you spoke to that a little bit. I have to ask Joshua. It's a dumb question. Sorry, everyone. The daughter in your book is named Judy Blum. I wonder if this is at all intentional with our very famous YA, predominantly successful and iconic author, young author, Judy Blum.
It's actually Judith, right?
It's Judith. Yeah. You did. I don't know. I think I just, I don't remember, to be honest with you. I think it just sounded good.
It did sound good. But what's interesting to me is whether it was intentional or not, I think it actually tracks because Judy Blum, for me, I mean, we're talking about books. I'm one of your readers. And for me, my introduction to literature on a slightly more elevated level was Judy Blum.
I'll tell you a really quick story about this, and because there's no other setting in which I can tell it.
Please.
I tried to tell it to the New York Times, and the New York Times was like, "We're not interested in this at all." So when there was this amazing lawsuit between Bibi and Ehud Olmert on about Diba, slander, defamation, right? So it was a defamation case, and Olmert, to make it more of a carnival, brought my book into court and wanted to say, what I said about Bibi and Sarah, and was, that they were mentally ill or whatever he said, that wasn't the worst thing. Like, they're even saying it in America. There's this American guy who wrote an entire book about how everyone in the family was crazy and blah, blah, blah. So he wanted to bring it into court. and he wanted to bring it into court. Okay. So, but anyway, before he wanted to bring it into court, he wanted to talk to me. And I said, sure, I'll talk to you, Ehud Olmert, because why not? You know, it's like he should know that that's like he's just offering me a story. So I said, okay, yeah, I'll talk to you. And then he said, I would really like to talk to Yehudit, to Judith. I'd really like to talk to her. And I was like, do you know what fiction is?
Wow.
I was like, wow, you would like to talk to a, okay, I'll put you in touch. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyway,
Incredible.
yeah, yeah,
He definitely didn't listen to the thing like the last chapter, or didn't read the last chapter where you explain
right.
a bit of that. But I did want to refer to something Joshua said before about languages, that it was very interesting in the Netanyahus when you chose them to talk Yiddish, when
Mm,
you chose for them to speak Hebrew, and the way you did that. It was really interesting. It was very smart.
thank you.
Um, and in that aspect, I think this novel is also like translated within, like it has translations in the English version too, right?
Thank
And they're like constantly translating to one another, because when Edith is talking to him in the bar, and then Tsila comes, and then she's too drunk to talk English,
you. Yeah, yeah.
and so translation happens there all over, right?
Good
Yeah.
place. Yeah.
It's
Trans-
it is as a, and as a comedian who doesn't, funny in books is hard. It can be, funny. There's so much comedy and humor in the Netanyahus. And you said something that I was going to ask about I forget. Anyway, it doesn't matter. What I will also ask you is the Netanyahus asks a question that I think many Jews are asking today.
Mhm.
Should Jewish history be lived as a permanent emergency? Or does American normalcy offer sort of a genuine escape from this, even now? In other words, whose side are you on, the Blooms or the Netanyahus? Pick. Just kidding. But really, should what is your feeling on this?
You're asking me?
Yes.
I mean, I don't, again, I mean, I think that this is kind of an answer I gave a little bit earlier, which is I really do believe that this, you know, look, if you look at like the Olim Yordim statistics, right? It's like the same number of people are canceling their toshavut and leaving Israel, right? Because they can't stand all the blah 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 and all the years in Miluim, and it's enough already. And the same number of people are leaving as the people who are saying, "I'm tired of getting beat up for my kippah in Toronto or in England or in France and blah blah blah." I think the difference is that the people that you're losing in Israel are moving to New York and getting tech jobs, and the people that they're gaining in Israel from here are moving the shtachim. But whatever, it's a population transfer at its finest. I think that when there is some homeostasis in these systems, and there's never really been homeostasis to this degree in the system, where, in other words, the system balances itself out with the amount of people leaving and the amount of people coming, keeping a sort of equilibrium across the Jewish world. It kind of tells you that there is no safe place. You know, I
Yep.
mean, do you want to deal with drones, or do you want to deal with people yelling at you on the subway? Like, and I think that to different people in different parts of their lives, in different circumstances in their lives, in different familial agglomerations, have different answers to that. And I think you see those different answers playing out in these populations. But I think we're all in the same boat. But one side of it tips this way, and the side of it tips this way, and we'll see. But I also think that in terms of a permanent emergency, I don't really know that there's ever been a time where there wasn't an emergency. So we do well in those situations.
And Tehila, where do you think the protagonist in Hunting in America would be happy if she could find happiness? Is there a choice that she is or isn't making that would lead her to a less lonely path? And I think I'm asking because I want to believe that she isn't completely stuck in her isolation. So I'm just wondering if you even have considered that
Mhm.
potential.
Yeah. I think like the main question that I asked when I was writing this book, and maybe all of my books, I have like 6 books for now, was if love is possible at all in our circumstances of work, capitalism, war, here in Israel. And for her, I think it was like, is it possible somewhere else? Like, is it possible to leave something from yourself behind or to try to make it differently? Um, and I don't think like I think this was my motivation. I think it's still my motivation. I know it's possible. Love is possible because I do feel that to my children, to my partner, etc. Um, I'm sure she could be too. Maybe.
I want
Uh,
something good for her.
yeah.
Which
Yeah,
so,
I had this event. I think it was in New York or I don't know, somewhere in the US, and this person came up to me. No, it was actually in Tel Aviv, in an English bookstore, a beautiful English bookstore, book house. And this woman came up to me and she told me, I think this character was never hugged when she was a child. And I think she was right. Maybe she missed a few hugs, but I think we are all missing a few hugs. And I think, you know, I don't think literature is for comfort. I don't think for me, I don't write literature for comfort.
oh, I
I'm
know.
like connecting to Joshua, talking about discomfort. For me, it's about friction. It's about where friction is, where it happens. This is where a story happens, right? Yeah.
I think I'm just happy to hear that it's not autobiographical. But yes,
Most of it, no. Most of it, no.
okay. Thank you. We do have a question. Um, I am curious about the experience of getting your book translated. We covered a little bit of that. As authors, has there been a new market that surprised you more or less than others from the perspective of how new audiences react to your translated books? So when it goes into another language, does a new market respond in a similar or different way? I think it's for either.
Do you want to go ahead? Yeah.
Well, for me, it's the first time my book is translated. It was translated in the UK, in the US, and in France, and it did receive like different kind of perspectives in each one. Even from the book titles, like in the French one, they didn't put America inside. There's no America in the title. It's titled something else. It's titled 16 Parties of Hunting. Uh, and also, I think each culture gets something else. For me, like in Israel, the sentiment of the Israeli culture was more mentioned. And in the US, the American culture was more in focus rather than the Israeli one. But yeah.
Thank you. Um, I will also say, just going back also for a moment to, as we wait or see if there's another question, that, I'm thinking about my own experience with Israeli American culture clash. And again, I think I'm a very textbook Generation X American Ashkenazi New England Jew. And I think my experience in Israel at 17 was a level of hostility from my peers and a fascinating experience as though an understandable experience in that I felt that I was another group of overprivileged American diasporic kids coming over to drink and party for a summer while our peers walked around in army uniforms in much better shape, uh, with a seriousness and a soberness that we displayed. And what's fascinating to me, just in terms of talking about how in some ways there's a bookend with hunting in America, to have traveled back there again for the first time in 35 years in February, and to have experienced the response to my American diasporic present was one of compassion and understanding, to bring the cultures together in a moment that felt much more. I felt it was interesting that most of the Israelis I encountered were like, how are you? How are you doing? And I was like, how am I doing? How am I? I'm fine. I mean, it's bad, sucks. Actually, it really sucks. Psychologically, I'm suffering. When you were speaking about sort of whether it's drones or being yelled at on the street and talking about them as though they could be, equally shrugging and equally devastating. It's just an interesting thing that made me think about the culture clash I experienced and why I think I've responded so
Wasn't I
well.
wasn't suggesting they're equally devastating. I think let me go on record as saying drones are much, much
Yes.
worse. But I am
Yes.
saying that it's about what sort of taste you have for opposition. And I think
Yes.
that people have many different capacities for the opposition that gives them a sense of their own identity, to be frank. You
Yeah.
know, there and I do think also that there are absolutely ways in which communities are built around whatever local manifestation of trauma exists,
Yeah.
right? The communities of a miklat are very different from the communities of an American Jewish school, for example. But the communities that are built have their own integrities.
Thank you for that clarification. And I will also go
I
on
just
record.
didn't want the drone people coming at me.
No,
I
no,
was
no, 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 no. And I too understand the difference. I
yeah, yeah,
think
yeah.
my point was truly to say that there is I personally have experienced as a reader and a consumer of these kinds of books that really do address Israeli American cultures and how they differ and how they come together. It was so potent for me. So I will ask a couple more questions and then we will probably be wrapping up. But the question I would like to ask you is, and this was a question I was going to ask anyway, what were the books that inspired you to write? And by the way, if there's no long-standing book that you can come to in the moment, a great book recommendation I will add from recent past that you would like to promote or that you think is great.
Well, I can start. I can say like
Please.
Orly Kastelblom, which was translated to English, is a very big influence for me. And also, Joshua mentioned Kanyuk. Um, like I think I read Nevelot, um, maybe in my 20s, and I'm sure it influenced this book, like Hunting in America. But I read like also I love Maya Neitan's work, which was also translated, and I can go on and on talking about my colleagues. But Joshua.
I don't know. One of the things I've been thinking about since the beginning of this event is I'm looking on the shelf here. Is someone stole uh, my Der Nister books? You're in Der Nister bookstore, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, I haven't read him in a very long time. Where are my Der Nister books? And I can just kind of see at the corner of my eye where they should be, and someone absolutely stole them. So I don't know. I think that book he has, what is Mishpacha Mashber, the family Mashber, right? Mashber family Mashber. I don't know how it's translated. Um, is one of the great books, and I remember that making an enormous impression on me. I think in terms of making me wanting to be a writer. I don't know. I think for me, part of wanting to be a writer is to convince yourself that everyone else is doing it wrong, you know? And so it's like it, and you know, because why else would you write if everyone else is doing it so well, right? And giving you everything you need, what would you do? It would be like, you know, it would be like me saying to Nike sneakers, like, you know, I don't, you know, you have to be like, I don't like the way you make these sneakers. I think I can make a pair of sneakers that's better, right? So you really, really have to go into it thinking that you're dealing with an inferior product, unfortunately. And that's why I think it's a game for the very young, because when you're young enough, you're dumb enough to say, look at this writing, it's shit. I could do so much better. And so I think it was my wrongfully perceived incompetence, or the incompetence that I wrongly perceived among my illustrious forebears, that allowed me to be foolish enough to add my name to the list. And now that my name got on the list, I'm stuck there.
Excellent. All right, we have a couple more questions. Why did Tehila decide not to give her lead character a name?
It's a problem I used to have. I couldn't name characters. It made me feel like they were suddenly someone else. But in my next novel, the characters are gonna have names. But also, in specific with this character, as I said before, I wanted her to feel a bit like a ghosty kind of feel. And I felt like not giving her a name can help that. Can like, yeah.
Yeah, she definitely feels disembodied in that way, truly. Okay. Is there room for non-political Israeli books in today's international climate? Or are Israeli writers in Hebrew these days only, should they only be able to represent Israel, or not should they? Or Israeli writers in Hebrew these days only, what is their task? Can they only represent Israel or the Jewish experience?
That's for you. You know, it's not.
Yeah, it's for the ITHL, I think, not for me, right?
Yeah. It's not. For, you don't
Yeah.
represent.
You know, I think like my job is to write books and to do the best job that I can do, and to wish for readers for them. And I know situation is not good right now for Israeli authors, but maybe I'm like very naive, but I think um, that if it will get to the right hand, it can also be translated. This is what I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. Um, this is a question also really more for the Institute. But unless either of you have a thought about this, but the sort of state of reviewing Hebrew books in translation. What is the state of reviewing Hebrew books in do magazines of various sorts review these books? So there's a question. Have you, do you get reviewed more or less in the state of the world that we're in?
You asking me or Joshua?
Either of you.
Um, the book got reviews. The book was also like got reviews that or items that were canceled later on, and we didn't get any like explanation why. But it did get reviews. Yeah.
I mean, I think that that's a broader question for some of the institutes and some of the publishers. We can only hope. It's interesting if you do Google these books just from a personal point of view. You find reviews. They're often in Jewish book councils and places like this. So, it's great for smaller organizations to review them. This isn't exactly a question we're going to end here. It's more of a comment for Tehila. One of the moments that really stayed with me from the book was the observation that gever, man, and kever, grave, are only one letter apart. As an Israeli American reader, that felt profoundly Israeli to me. There was something both dark and beautiful about that connection.
Thank you. It was actually a brilliance of translation of Joanna Chen, because in the Hebrew version it was um, 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 something else that I
Mhm.
now forget. Oh my God. But she did that. So that's for Joanna. That one is for Joanna.
A testament to why translation is so important. I would like to begin to close out. Before I thank everyone, I will say that our next book club is with Edgar Keret on July 9th. Check your local time on the book club website, and please don't forget to register. We'll also send out a reminder and a registration link. Thank you to the fantastic team at the Israeli Institute for Hebrew Literature here in Los Angeles. Roy Regev was our technical producer, and Karen Hantman was our producer. And I very much want to thank Joshua Cohen and Tehila Hakimi for joining us today. It really is spectacular to be able to speak at length about these two beautiful, 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 and uncomfortable books. I am Jamie Denbo. Please, if you will, donate to the International Hebrew Literature Fund, and we'll see you next time on July 9th. And again, your contributions will help make translation better. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.